Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Welcome to the Mad Tea Party. No, wait. Happy Halloween. It's a Wilson Center version of the Mad Tea Party. My name is Jennifer Turner, and I direct the China Environment Forum here in between reading Lewis Carroll. Come on in, everyone, have a seat, and those of you online, welcome as well. Today's meeting, China's critical mineral investments in Africa. We're putting it on with my project as well as the Africa program and the Environmental Change and Security program here, and I want to thank them for that. You guys ready to get started? Yeah. Affirmation in the room here. All right. So the urgency of the climate crisis has accelerated global demand for minerals to fuel the clean energy transition, for renewables, electric vehicles, and more. And so this huge hunger for the rare earths and the critical minerals has really shown the spotlight on China. For decades, China has been investing in these metals and minerals when other countries weren't. And so they dominate the supply chains. I mean, I think one example is in lithium that's used for electric vehicles, China controls 60%. That's both in terms of they're supporting the mines and they're doing the refining. Now, extracting minerals from Africa is not a new thing, from the colonial period to today. And it's also extracted a lot of, it's left a lot of environmental and social damages in its wake. So today, we have 4 panelists who will highlight the stories and the impacts of Chinese overseas investments in critical minerals sector in Africa. They're going to talk about potential the trends, as well as strategies to protect the communities and the environment. So we're just going to get started, okay? Because it's like time is short and a lot to discuss today. So to kick us off today, we have Claude Kabemba, who I discovered after breaking bread, or rather noodles and rice last night at Teaism. He is my 5th brother. So Claude Kabemba is a political economy expert who has 26 years experience in doing research and policy, both research and policy work on mineral governance and development in Africa. He's the executive director of the Southern Africa Resource Watch, which is a pan-Africa organization dedicated to monitoring the governments and the corporations that are working in the mineral, oil, and gas extraction in Africa. So he's going to kick us off with maybe bigger picture and telling stories. Emmanuel Umpula Nakumba is executive director of African Natural Resources Watch, AfriWatch, I hope I got that right. So he's got a deep background in working in human rights organizations like the Jimmy Carter Foundation. There's also a platform of civil society organizations working in the mining sector in Katanga. He has supported a number of communities in filing complaints against multinational companies and even the Congolese state before the African Commission on Human and People's Rights around mineral issues. So he's going to give us a snapshot of trends and things that his organization does in the DRC. And then we have Matuso Diliwa, who's the executive director and founding member of the Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association, great acronym, ZELA. So ZELA is a public interest environmental law organization that works to promote democracy, good governance, and transparency and accountability around the natural resources sector. And as you could tell from his name, we're going to hear stories from Zimbabwe. We're taking a trip around the continent today. And last but not least is Zhang Jingjing, who I think 2010 was the first time she came here when she was a public interest litigation director at the Beijing-based Center for Legal Assistance for Pollution Victims. She did that from 1999 to 2008. Won lots of major cases there in Chinese courts. She also is the founder of the Center for Transnational Environmental Accountability and lectures at law at University of Maryland. For the past, I want to say, 10 years, you've been tromping around Latin America and Africa, kind of looking at trying to get she's suing people. She's suing people, particularly Chinese companies, trying to push them to comply with environmental and international human rights norms. So she's going to tell stories from her work in Africa. And then your job, both online and in the room, is to ask challenging questions, get them to tell more stories. You guys ready for the tea party? All right, let's go. Thank you. So Claude, you want to come on up here? Do you want to click or me click?
You click.
I click. It's not your
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you, the Center for Transitional Environmental Accountability, through Jingjing, for the invitation. I also want to thank you, the Wilson Center, for hosting us. If there is something you are going to take out of this meeting, is this. There is no bad and good investors in Africa. The issue of China is spoken in the geostrategic manner. But when you follow the work that we do, we've monitored dozens of Western companies. We've monitored dozens of Chinese companies. We've also monitored dozens of African companies. All of them, they behave the same. That's why the poorest communities in Africa are mining communities. If you show me one community around the Western company that is better off than the community around the Chinese company, then my message is false. There isn't. The Marikana case in South Africa, where Lonmin was extracting PGM, platinum, 34 miners were killed for protesting for their labor rights, for a living wage. Kabwe in Zambia is the most polluted city in the world because of lead extraction by a Western company, Anglo-American. Malawi, the uranium extraction in Kairekera by an Australian company, has left serious environmental degradation and pollution. So, if there's something you are going to get, is that Africa needs to build its own defensive mechanism to protect against Western and Chinese extractivism. For us, can I have a slide? That's what we expect. That the extraction of these critical minerals, your copper, your coltan, your cobalt, your lithium, your graphite, your zinc, your nickels, your manganese are going to increase exponentially by 2050. And we don't have sufficient minerals for that. We need to invest in new findings. So the countries that have these minerals, slide please. China controls most of the extraction on these critical minerals. Two of our resource-rich countries, we have Zimbabwe and the DRC. The DRC is the biggest producer of cobalt, 70% of world production of cobalt. Zimbabwe is mentioned as the sixth producer of lithium. In the Congo DRC, they've just discovered in Manono almost 400 million tons of lithium. It could be the biggest in the world, but still has not been extracted. In Zimbabwe, 4 key mines are controlled by Chinese. In the DRC, 19 cobalt mines out of 15 are controlled by the Chinese. The Chinese control the value chain of this extraction. But the story that we have not been told is that most of these companies were first and foremost Western companies. Chinese bought them from Western companies. When they bought them, they also bought the active and passive problems, environmental, human rights, and so forth. So what we see, and the argument I make is that China has been using the weaknesses of African society created by our relationship with the West. Because what colonialism did since 1985 is to make African following and a moving target. Every time we have an opportunity to declare that now we are going to benefit from our minerals, the target moves. That's why we are saying today, the energy transition and critical minerals gives us an opportunity for development. Can I have a slide, please? So out of a research which was done shows that indeed 20 out of 22 projects has revealed environmental and biological biodiversity problem and risk by Chinese companies. And you'll see that the DRC and Zambia were also looked at. Can we move? And the problem is that when you look at countries that produce these minerals, the DRC and Zimbabwe are among the lowest in terms of Human Development Index. What does it mean? It means that labor issues are a problem, environmental degradation, child labor, poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Slide, please. So these are key challenges. Africa does not own its minerals. The DRC minerals, all those have been sold to foreign companies. So the country does not own them. Even when they say we are going to manufacture batteries, it's from which minerals? Then they have to renegotiate mining contract to ensure that they do that. The contestation to access these minerals is between China and the West. And most of Chinese mines were both, I've said that. How do we then achieve the energy transition? In this environment of a dominant neocolonial system, is it possible to achieve a just transition for Africa in the current economic model? And I propose that we need to change, and the West needs to play a key role to ensure that we have global social justice in which Africa benefits. But the competition between the West and Africa, in fact, is doing the opposite. Is increasing human rights violation, is increasing corruption. In fact, is reversing democracy. Because our leadership, to protect their power, are prepared to sell our minerals cheaply to the first comer who can protect their power. They are also prepared to sell it too easily to fund the next cycle of elections. So we are in a very difficult situation where I think the West must be able to lead and to ensure that China does not repeat the mistake that they made. And our advocacy and monitoring of Chinese companies is not necessarily that because China is bad, is that China should not repeat the mistake of the others. Because the social conditions have changed. Communities are fighting back. And the fighting of communities puts in danger some of this investment. Can we have a slide, please? So we think that these minerals are catalysts for development for us today. We also think that energy transition in Africa is not just about energy, access energy. That's why the definition of just energy is different from different geographies. For us, energy transition is about rebuilding a structure economic transformation, where we build new economies throughout of that. That's why we appreciate the DRC and Zambia collaboration to manufacture batteries and precursors on the continent. That's why we appreciate 500 million proposal by South Africa to put up a plant to manufacture batteries. That's why we are encouraging the African Union through the African Mining Vision and its green strategy development for a more integrated approach to mineral development on the continent. So communities are engaged in violent struggle, soft struggle that you don't hear in the bush where these minerals are extracted across the board. There is an increasing movement about keeping minerals underground. People are saying there's no need for us to extract because the consequences are poverty, environmental degradation, water pollution, and all this. And we think, and together, we need to argue, we need to advocate for a more just society, for a more just global society, for minerals where the marginalized, the poor benefit the most. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for that. Setting a somber stage. I think I'm going to take my hat off. It's getting warm too. So you're going to speak from your seat?
Yeah.
Do you want the clicker?
No,
You want me to be the clicker?
Yeah, you can do that.
I can. I'm here for you.
So thank you, Dr. Claude. Just to add,
My name is Emmanuel Umpula, and I work for AfriWatch. So to start where Dr. Claude ends, about how Chinese investment came in DRC and even across Africa. In DRC, the Western, from 2007, sold their mines to Chinese companies. And at that time, I think the relationship between China and Western was good. And then they decided to sell their shares to Chinese, not because of they got money from Chinese, but also because of human rights responsibilities, because at that time we were talking about human rights responsibilities. And it was very easier for them to say, we are not responsible for what is happening on the ground. So that's the first reason why they sold their shares. So I will share with you some 3 points. The first one, in terms of key challenges, the first one is environmental pollution. The second one is pollution. And the third one is threats to human rights defenders. And yes. So, next please. So before to start, you can see what DRC is producing now. So you can see we never produced this before, even during the colonization period. So now we are producing above around more than 100,000 tons of copper and around of of cobalt and more than 2,500,000 tons of cobalt. So it's a lot of production, and this leads to more negative impact to communities. And I think that the projection will, in 2025, I think we produce more. And the objective is to go beyond Chile, which is producing 5 million of ton of copper. So it's a lot. And there is a lot of mining companies. And as Dr. Claude said, we have more Chinese companies which are controlling these minerals. And so, next please. So in terms of pollutions, you can see some images where pollution is leading. So people, they can't grow food. People, they get sick. They lose their houses. And there is a lot of people who are displaced from their lands forever. So it's a huge impact. And there's many people facing these kind of challenges. Next, please. And you can see the next picture, the same. And this just some example, as you can see. So when we talk to communities, the debate is not on, sometimes we talk about child labor. Child labor is a consequence of poverty. Sometimes we talk about, it's because the Congolese government is not doing anything to protect. Yes, we admit Congolese government has these responsibilities. But companies are trying to get more benefits. They don't like to share profit with communities. So we can invest in terms of communities development. Yes, next please. So because of when Chinese got a contract from Western, there were a lot of cases of corruption. So this is some cases where you can find corruption with. They were first in 2013 the report of African Panel Progress, which stated that we lose Congo lost more than $1 billion in terms of contracts. And there is a movement of 14 NGOs. It's called Congo is Not for Sale. You can see what we did some research, and we found that what Congo is lost, and it will be around 3.71 billions in terms of case of corruption. This corruption was led by one of Israeli man, which was linked to the former president. So this is a case of corruption which took place before the new administration. Next, please. And there is a lot of Western companies involved, and this man was even sanctioned by U.S. government. So what human rights defenders are doing, we are trying to fight these injustice cases. And you can see friends or colleagues who are being threatened because of their work. You have Grady Koko and Malela, Navi Malela, former employee of the Afriland Bank. They are sentenced to death in 2020 because of their work, because they are whistleblowers. So they did a good job. They denounced a case of corruption, and then now they live out of the country. You have a colleague, Jean-Jacques Lumumba, in the same situation now. And our spoken person, Jean-Claude Putu, for Congo is Not for Sale, now is under and Resource Matters. They are sued by Ms. Dan Gettler. So that's the environment where we are working, and you can see why it's very complicated for human rights defenders to work in DRC. So in terms of recommendations, as NGOs, what we recommend, what we demand to reduce negative impact on communities. So that's one we are asking by the implementation of laws by both Congolese government and international companies or government. Then we need to strengthen role of NGOs, because we are working in hard environment, but also we need to make sure that NGOs has found they needed to do their work. We need to increase local development of minerals. So in this transition mineral or critical mineral, we don't need to see Africa like a reservoir of minerals where people will go and just take raw materials and then can make profit here. So what we need, we need to have a win-win contract. We need to transform locally our minerals. Why not to produce precursor of batteries first and then to produce battery, and so we can get more. That will help us to add value to our minerals. And also we need to support law which give access to information and to protect human rights defenders, but also whistleblowers in their work in DRC. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. As we switch the slides, I want to remind you guys, keep thinking of your questions. We're going to power through the next two speakers, but also people at home on your computers, there's a little widget. Submit your questions there. And I think, Matusa, I think it's your time.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Jennifer, you have to get to the beginning, sorry.
Jennifer, and also thank you very much to Xingjing for hosting us here. And let me also start by saying good morning to you all. So the name as introduced is Mtuso Liwayo. I am a lawyer. I'm based in Harare, Zimbabwe, and I work for a public interest environmental organization called Zimbabwe Environmental Association. And I'll be sharing with you our perspectives in terms of Chinese investments in the critical mineral sector in Zimbabwe, looking at the opportunities and also the challenges that are associated with their investment, and our focus on lithium. Next. Oh, okay. Yeah, so Zimbabwe, at least for the time being, is thought to have the largest reserves of lithium in Africa, and it's estimated that it's either the 5th largest producer or 6th largest producer. But of course, there are some discoveries that are still ongoing. Yeah, so who knows where we may end up? Yeah, and we are also estimated that we can actually potentially supply the global demand up to about 20%. And it is also important to note that in terms of lithium mining, this has always been there, I think since around the 1950s. And this was being done through Bikita lithium mining. But it's basically the decarbonization agenda that has actually thrusted Zimbabwe again onto the global map in terms of this rush and the demand for lithium resources. And we have a number of investors there that are interested in this lithium, and these are both from the west and also from the east. Next. And when we analyze in terms of the who dominates the value chain, I think as those that spoke before me have indicated, it's basically China. So we have got about 4 large mining companies in Zimbabwe that are all mining lithium, and these are all Chinese. So we have the first one, which is Sino Mine Resource Group, which bought what is called Bikita Lithium Mine, which I said has been operating since the 1950s. Then we also have Zhangjiang Hayo Cobalt, which acquired Acadia Prospect in 2021. Then we have Cheng Lithium Group, owned by Max Mine Investments, which also bought what is called Sabistar Lithium, again around 2021. Then we have the last one, which is invested in Kamativ, and this is a joint venture with a state-owned company called the Zimbabwe Minerals Development Corporation. So all these are Chinese. But again, as people have pointed out, they were not originally Chinese. They were basically companies that were belonging to Western investors, and then they sold them. And probably I should also give the background that when there was this fallout between the West and Zimbabwe in 2000, most of the Western companies actually disinvested from Zimbabwe, and China saw that as an opportunity. So as we speak today, it's basically Chinese that have taken over in terms of this critical mining sector, in terms of mining lithium. So most companies are basically the Chinese, and even the smaller ones that are there. So they dominate without effect, without a doubt. So next, please. So that map indicates in terms of where this mining is actually happening, those 4 big mining. One there in Goromonza, that's Harare. Then the other one is Bohera, Bikita, then Kamative. So that's the map of Zimbabwe there, for those that are not really aware. It's a teapot-shaped country with also significant mineral reserves, including lithium. Next. But what challenges do we have in terms of Chinese investments in the critical mineral sector? So we have a number of challenges as society organizations and also as community-based organizations. And these include environmental, economic, social, and cultural rights. So when the extraction is happening, there are some serious impacts in terms of the community's environmental rights, in terms of their cultural rights, in terms of their economic rights, and also their social rights. So everyone talks about mining as being critical in terms of economic development and benefits. But for communities, they don't see the benefits. All they see are the costs that are associated with mining, whether it is environmental degradation, whether it is pollution of their water resources, whether it is involuntary displacement and resettlement without fair and adequate compensation, whether it is the loss of livelihoods. All these are problems that communities have always experienced, not just with the critical minerals. Mining has always been like that in terms of the communities. So for them, they question the benefits that are associated with mining. All they see are costs that are associated. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we face, to say, look, this is a critical mineral that is going to help to decarbonize the economy, but the community don't see the benefit. They don't see the benefit that are associated with that because, as people have pointed out, these minerals are just mined and shipped somewhere. I mean, they don't have those electrical vehicles, and some of them don't even have energy access. They're struggling in terms of getting access to energy, but here are people talking about this mineral that is critical to decarbonize the economy and make sure that we develop globally. But what about them? They don't see these benefits. So those are some of the challenges that we are basically looking at. And also the lack of benefits. It's very clear that communities don't get these benefits. then even when it comes to corporate social responsibility projects, they don't see them as being meaningful. I mean, we've heard the examples where people put bins and they regard that as corporate social responsibility. But for people that are mining a critical mineral like lithium, and all they can do is basically put a bin and then declare that as a benefit. Then, of course, there are also serious illicit financial flows that are associated with these mining activities, and the Chinese have also been fingered in that. But as people have pointed out, it's not just the Chinese only. I mean, when you look at the Mbeki High-Level Panel report, it actually outlines the challenges that are there within the mining sector, and it is one of the biggest drivers of illicit financial flows. Next. Then displacement, I've already highlighted that it is a very big problem. Communities lose their land and they are relocated. And one would say that they are actually being dumped somewhere, because it's not relocation, because in terms of international guidelines, relocations should not leave you in a worse off position. It should actually leave you in a better off position, but we are not seeing that. Communities are not consulted, they are not provided with access to information, and there are also some challenges that are associated with the lack of grievance redress mechanisms, and China was actually a big problem in that regard. But we are happy that of recently, there has now been some developments where the Chinese Chamber of Commerce has developed some communication and consultation guidelines, and we hope that this will be able to provide access to remedy to the community that are affected by these mining activities. So as you can see there, that's a mined out area that has not been rehabilitated, and that's land that is lost. But this is for communities, an area that they used to grow food from, and now there are serious challenges. Next. Then the environmental degradation is a very big problem. Then loss of lives. People have fallen into those pits because they're not rehabilitated. So we have had examples of people, children falling into those pits. But not only that, even livestock, which is critical in terms of economic development, in terms of the African setting. And people are losing out those cattle, those goats, which may not be significant to a mining company, but they mean a lot to this community because it's a source of livelihood. Yeah, and there are also allegations in terms of labor rights violations that are associated with Chinese investments. So all those are serious problems, and even these unrehabilitated pits, when the rains comes, they become breeding grounds for mosquitoes, and there are serious implications in terms of the right to health as provided for under national, regional, and international law.
Mutuso, can you lean forward a little more
Oh.
towards your mic? Sorry.
Thank you.
There we go.
That reminder. Yeah. So those are some of the challenges that are associated in terms of these investments that are associated with Chinese investments in the mining sector or the critical mining sector. Next, please. Then there's also this concern that there seems to be collusion between Chinese investors and the government of Zimbabwe, for example. Because we have a government that is desperate for investment. I've indicated that there's not much investment coming from the West. So China is regarded as the biggest investor in terms of foreign direct investment. So the government of Zimbabwe don't see anything wrong because they say this is the only investor that is willing to invest in Zimbabwe. And this has serious implications in terms of our governance, in terms of our political governance, our economic governance. So we see this lack of transparency and accountability, the contracts that are negotiated, we don't even know them, we don't even see them. And all those are now problems that we are beginning to experience. And even the implications in terms of policy making, because they're able to influence. And the government of Zimbabwe says, well, as long as we are able to get investment, then that's fair and fine. So there are all those biggest challenges that we are facing in terms of the investments. But I think as people have pointed out, it's not a problem with Chinese investments only. I mean, we have been working in this sector for a long time, and all these problems can also be pointed to those other companies or those other investors that are operating within the mining sector. But because the focus of this conversation is on Chinese investments, we are also seeing those also being replicated in terms of their involvement in the critical mining sector. So these are challenges that are there, and as civil society organizations, just like what my colleagues have pointed out, we work with communities, we build their capacities, and I think one of the biggest challenges that we've seen is that compared to Western companies, Chinese don't seem to care about civil society organizations and communities. Once they get that license, for them, it's a done deal. And That's why we have had some serious problems, because we also think that as society organizations and community-based organizations, we are important stakeholders that also needs to be consulted. But we hope that they are also learning. I think they are also now aware that their image is under serious threat, and they're also trying to reform. So in terms of our work as society organizations, we try to advocate for those reforms and make sure that there's transparency and accountability in terms of the contracts that are negotiated. So we hope that with this work that we are doing, China is also going to come to the party and begin to understand those challenges that are associated with its investments. That when we raise these issues, it's not that we are against its investment, but we also are advocating for them to be more responsible and improve in terms of their investments. So I can see Jennifer is looking at me, but I'll be happy to stop there and engage in terms of conversations. So those are some of the developments. We see there the Hwanghae National, the Hwanghae coal-fired power station. They added unit 7 and 8, and this has helped to improve in terms of access to energy. So that investment is critical for us. Then the Parliament of Zimbabwe there, we have a brand new airport, which has been upgraded, and all that is due to Chinese investment. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are opportunities there that can also be improved on. Thank you.
Watch for the last slide here. Ready? The curtain. We all want to know how you did this PowerPoint. Okay, but thank you so much. No, I wasn't giving you like that eye or anything like that. But no, reminding people online, you guys think of your questions. It's coming, Jing Jing. Don't get restless out there. But also people online, make sure you submit your questions. Okay, Jing Jing. Oh, she wants control of the clicker. All right.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And I've been this stage for many times. 10 years ago, I was talking about Chinese, the mining, Chinese pollution within China, manufactured pollution as an environmental litigator at the Chinese court. And 10 years after, or 20 years after, I'm talking about China's development globally and the implication to the environment and the ecosystem in other continents. And I'm taking you with the journey, looking back 20 years ago, looking at the picture, the upper left, was standing on this pile of the solid waste outside a chemical factory in Fujian province. And the chemical waste with cadmium polluted groundwater and make the village sick. We represent the lawyers, and my organization represented 1,721 villages sued against the chemical company, and we won compensation for those people who suffered pollution. And fast forward to 2018, and that was 5 years after China announced the Belt and Road Initiative. I was standing on the mining roads in one of the Western country, the resource-rich country, Guinea, Republic of Guinea, and this is the mining road connect the bauxite mine to the port. And look at those local women. They are walking across this very dangerous, busy mining roads to fetch the water. Traditionally, they can get the water access in their village, but since the rapid development of mining changed the landscape of the villages, and they have to walk very long to get the water. And then this year, I found myself standing in the village next to a cobalt mining owned by a Chinese company in Jinchuan in Lubumbashi in DRC. And this is exactly 10 years after China announced the Belt and Road Initiative. And what impact Chinese companies have been brought to Africa? We all know China, the West countries and African countries themselves have been mining for decades. And why we're talking about the critical minerals today? Because critical minerals have the critical meanings to different players. For industrialized nations, the greater power, US, Canada, Europe, and China. And the country needs critical mineral for their economic development as well as energy transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy. Those minerals are critical for the renewable energy. And then for the people working on the climate change, the critical minerals means they are needed for the renewable energy. They are called transition minerals, and they are critical for energy transition. But for the community, are those minerals critical? Not necessary, because what's critical for them is their land, their livelihoods, the clean water and the clean air. Those are critical for those community. While we are seeing those the mining project, large-scale mining project, no matter from China and from West country, has been brought economic development and job opportunities and infrastructure to the community. They are also bring a lot of the problems to community. Look at the mining road. After 10 years, 5 years running rapid development in Guinea, and people are still working on this dusty, muddy mining roads, and it's not safe for community members to walk on it, especially for those kids. They have to walk very far to go to their schools. And look at those the very peaceful, clean beach, and soon they will become the port for the Chinese mining company in Guinea, and which is planned as the infrastructure project necessary to the bauxite mining. It was for the boat to carry the bauxite ore back to China. And then soon the fishermen will lose their access to their food, the fish, because they couldn't get access to the water. They have to reforest or wilderness to be relocated to other place. So those impacts we have been seeing, and the economic benefit, yes, they are some, but not necessarily. Each of the community member have access to those economic opportunity. But the environmental impact, pollution, they are seeing every day, they are experiencing every day. And the rapid development of the mining has changed their lifestyle, especially for the indigenous people, the indigenous community. Their lifestyle have totally changed. And so the governance.
4 minutes.
Okay. So governance, those large mining project has been weakening the already very weak institution in Africa and other institution weak country with rich natural resource. This is what I've been seeing, the impact, negative impact caused by mining project. And we all know China has dominated the critical minerals in entire value chain. And what's driven Chinese company to expand broadly, because those minerals are critical to China's own economic development. And China consider those minerals are critical for the China's own development as strategic minerals. And China made this list category of critical minerals. And also you see the minerals in this list by the China Geological Survey, and there's 2 reports announced last year and this year. And the last year was 4 the critical minerals are considered strategic mineral. And this year there were 8 more, so together 13 minerals are critical to China's economic development. And the criticality may change, but for China, it's the national security issue, not necessarily from the perspective of the climate change, the energy transition, but those minerals are critical to China's economic development. And China has been, because the criticality, China has been building this on the newest state central government-owned company called China Mineral Resource Group, which is aimed to target those critical minerals, include iron, bauxite, and lithium, all those critical minerals critical to China. And now you are seeing there are so many Chinese business entities in this industry, from the mining, processing, and manufacture the batteries, and who those are Chinese company. And so there are various business entities, not only the state-owned. You often heard about state-owned enterprise driven by China's agenda to pursue the minerals globally, not only state-owned. There are many non-state-owned private Chinese companies. They are moving very quickly. And another characteristic of the Chinese mining project, they have fast entry, rapid development, and expanding very quickly to upstream of the value chain of the mining and metal supply value chain. So those, there are invisible investors, the financiers, Chinese banks, and so those characters, they're all layers of the business entities, not only state-owned. So the reason I list all this the company's name is we compare with those multinationals from China, from West country, and the company from African continent itself. We, civil society, we're tiny. We have to work together and collaborate together, and then as a watchdog of the government and our society, and then we can combine strengths and hold those large-scale mining projects accountable.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So I'm happy. A lot of I'm not like my assistant is texting me the questions from online, just so you know. I'm not like, so yeah, thank you guys. Great presentations, gave you a quick taste. Think of your questions. I want one thing where you ended, you said that we in civil society, by the we, initially she's speaking about everyone on the stage over here, that do you want to, do you want to talk about this, that you've created, just briefly, the Critical Minerals Accountability Alliance? Do you want to say anything about that, or is it?
Yeah. The reason I invite my partners and organization here, the gentlemen here, and to this stage is we aim to build this coalition and combine our strengths and combine our expertise and better play our role as watchdog of the society. And we want to ensure the communities benefit from the mining project and not suffering. And that's the reason we're here. This coalition is still very new, and we want these strengths combined, and so we can fight against those large corporate power and government power, and ensure our environment get protected, our communities' rights get protected.
Okay, great. So I've got some questions. I'm going to do just a couple from online, and then you guys think questions. I want to ask Danning and Juryuan to get the mics ready for the room questions. All right, so Devin Parker. He says, great presentations. And he wanted to ask about because some of you mentioned about forced displacements. Mm-hmm. And just briefly, maybe like in the DRC and Zimbabwe, what does it look like? Like, who is actually moving these communities, and where do they go? I mean, it's like, I'm just thinking of different kind of situations, like in China when I was living there, like they'd come in the middle of the night and put a big, in red paint, right, Jai, which means we're tearing down your house, and you wake up in the morning and you gotta go. Anyone wanna, Emmanuel?
Okay, thank you. I think if we see in DRC, for instance, the company, normally they work together with state agencies. Mm-hmm. And but because of the domination of companies to the state, which is weak, that means the company is deciding. And the law says that you should not just compensate and displace the communities, but you should reinstall them to another place. But the company usually they just the good way for them um, to not invest a lot, they just give money. And when you give money, so people will not be get other land, for instance, where they can grow food. And this is creating a lot of problem for communities, destabilization, and yeah, that's the way it works. I don't have many cases where companies really invest to relocate communities.
I mean, it's kind of interesting because in China, you know, there's like a whole government office for like with hydropower and like in helping migrants move and finding them places, but not being replicated overseas because it's not their country. But Matuso, do you have any? Have you sued anyone over this?
Yes, we have, and unfortunately, we have lost.
Oh, can you lean forward still?
Yeah,
Sorry.
we have lost because the communities do not own land. That's the starting point. So they may have use rights, access rights, and the right to build houses, but when it comes to ownership, that's state land. So whenever a resource of value is found, then the state reserves the right to move these communities and resettle them somewhere. So that in itself is not a problem because under international guidelines, it's very clear what should constitute good involuntary displacement and resettlement. But this is not being followed. So that need to consult them, provide them with information, then fair and adequate compensation in terms of determining to say what is fair and adequate compensation. That's not happening. So I think that's the biggest challenge. So when a company gets that license, they simply go there to the communities and say, we have been told that we can develop our project here. I think here in the US, we call that the power of eminent domain. Yeah, so that's the biggest challenge that we face. The land is not theirs, it's state land. So whenever they find lithium, cobalt, or whatever it is, they are forcibly evicted and dumped. Let me use that word. They're not being relocated, it's being dumped. Because some of the conditions where they are being put in terms of social amenities, they are not there. People have to fend on their own. Yeah. So there are a few case studies where companies, I think Rio Tinto at one of the times did what we called a model resettlement. But they were able to provide them with better houses, amenities, and all those. But most of these other companies, it's dumping, as I've called it.
Was that a state-owned or non-state-owned?
No, it was a multinational corporation.
multinational.
Rio Tinto, yeah,
So-
Australian. Yeah, they did a good job. That's the only successful example that I've had in the history of mining in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Dunning's going to bring the mic. And while you're bringing the mic over, just even when you lose cases, is there some benefit?
Yes. We call that the victory in defeat in a way, because during that process, when we sue, at least we get to understand what the government has in terms of its thinking. So I can cite an example when we are suing a mining company that was working collaboratively with the state-owned enterprise to relocate communities from a diamond mining area. So we sued them. Then during that process, they said, look, we are not going to relocate the communities before we build houses, before we put these social amenities in place. Then we took that information to the community and said, this is what the government has promised. So as long as these houses are not there, as long as these social amenities are not there, don't agree to be relocated. So they used that as a mechanism. And sure enough, they tried to put something, but it was as a result of that information that we got. Then we now use that for advocates, build the capacity of the communities to understand that this is what should happen. Then we saw some sort of benefits, limited as they may be. So that's why I say it's still defeat, but there's victory in a way because we get access to information, which ordinarily the government would not provide to us if we had not sued. The government, the companies will not be willing to share with us. So
All right,
that's concept-
forced transparency here. Okay, Duncan, make sure when you ask questions, say who you are briefly, and then ask a succinct question.
Duncan Wood here at the Wilson Center. Thank you all for your excellent presentations. My question actually comes down to this again, which is the difference between Chinese companies and Western companies. As a couple of you have recognized that mining has shall we say, a complicated history, not just in Africa, but throughout the world. Companies have behaved badly in the past. However, a lot of the companies, Western companies, now claim that their values and their standards are higher and that this should be part of their competitive advantage vis-a-vis Chinese companies. How would you react to that?
And we had online, we had Ann Mosen from National Defense University was also asking, do any of these companies also, looking for models, like particularly helping communities? So just adding to you there. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think
Lau?
that's a very important question. We've seen very advanced norms and standards, global norms and standards around issues of human rights, issues of transparency and accountability. And we've seen Western companies really adhering or instituting that within their operations and policies. One of the biggest challenge for Western companies is that we are operating in a very unequal environment where we are being forced to abide by these norms, which are important. But on the other side, we've got Chinese companies which are not part of this global society of initiatives, of values and norms. That's the biggest challenge that we need to solve. But on the other side, China argues that those are dominant norms and standards, that even African countries were not part of it to create them. And the challenge, I think, what we need to start to say, how can we work together to bring the Chinese, the Indian companies, all these companies as part of these global norms? How do we do that? Is there some level of negotiations that will help the Chinese that are controlling most of these critical minerals to understand that these values are important, not just for Africans, of communities, but for themselves if they need to secure their investment? But we've seen also emerging, evolving new standards that are put by Chinese themselves, which are quite very advanced. In fact, when you put them on paper, they're quite similar. But the only difference that the Chinese want to feel like is theirs. They've created them. So there is a synergy that needs to be built to bridge this gap. I think that's why my point is that the West needs to work hard. I think that the geopolitics that is happening today is more problematic and creating distance between the Chinese joining these norms and standards, which are very good. But one important thing I think we need to say is that there is gap between the standards and implementation.
Yeah.
Even from the Western companies. That's why the work that we do is really to ensure corporate accountability, investing in monitoring. We just did work just to come back to the land issue on CIMOC. CIMOC is one of the biggest Chinese mining companies on the continent in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They bought the company from Freeport, an American company. We worked with the American company. We visited that mining company. We hold them to account. When the Chinese bought the company, we wrote to them to say you cannot lower the standard because we've worked with this company. They've started working hard to respond to people's need. They responded to us to say, we are going to work with you. We want to continue working with you. But the problem is that my colleague said it's very difficult for Chinese companies to open up. It's very difficult for the Chinese companies to be held to account against existing global initiatives. So we are in a very difficult position to hold Chinese companies to account, but they are opening up. There is progress that we are seeing, but that progress is coming with pressure. And we should not forget the pressure that communities are putting. There is a lot of community protest. And one of the research that we are doing, which is showing that some of Chinese companies that have got access to global markets respond positively to protest and to demand for global standards. But companies, Chinese companies that are more focused at local market, Chinese market, are very difficult to speak to, very difficult to access. So we are struggling with that. How do we bridge the gap between emerging Chinese standards and Western Chinese standards? The multiplicity of these standards are giving us challenges. How do you hold a company to account on which standards? Even Western companies, when you go there, they say, but there are just so many of these things. Which one should we be measured on? We are doing human right due diligence of Sibanye gold and platinum mines currently. It's just a list of so many standards that we need to follow and hold them to account. So it's a
drowning in
difficult
standards.
one. Yes.
Drowning
Thank
in
you so
standards.
much.
Jingjing,
Yeah. May I add?
since you've been suing Chinese companies for
Yeah.
a long time, you may have some insights.
Yeah, this is what would I want to add as a China trained lawyer. I have been seeing those Chinese companies has brought their business model or behaviors which rooted from in the China's own political and business environment. And for example, one of the Chinese company in DRC, you mentioned CIMOC. CIMOC is one of the non-state-owned company running a large cobalt site in DRC. Another private Chinese company, it got the highest penalty in China in 2011 because the tailing collapse killed people in Fujian province. And this company expanding globally in DRC, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in Central Asia, Serbia, and PNG. And that company, Image, it's running their subsidiary in those weak regulatory regime, and the company is taking advantage of the weak regulatory regime, and they are causing, those subsidiaries are causing more damage rather than provide economic benefit to host country and local communities. That's my point, China. And I agree with you, all the mining companies behave at the same level, but the Chinese company do have their own Chinese characteristics, which roots in China's own political, legal, and business environment back home.
But, you know, China just closed their Green Belt and Road Initiative Forum. A lot of talk about greening. And I was curious, like what you mentioned, there's that brand new company, the China Mineral Resources Group. I mean, is there any movement inside China to really, I don't know, with pressure from the financing side? You hear talk, but is it just talk?
Yes, there are some efforts made by the Chinese government and Chinese Business Association, by civil society organization within and outside China, trying to make Belt Road Initiative green and clean. We have been seeing a lot of guidance issued by Chinese government. The first guidance was issued in 2012, but the efforts is not strong enough, and guidelines, opinions are policy that are too soft to hold those Chinese companies accountable for their behavior outside China. And the information is a big issue. Transparency is an issue because those companies are not required to disclose their environment, social, and governance impact, ESG information for those subsidiaries outside China's territory. So we didn't know most general public in China, or include Chinese government itself, don't know the Chinese company's performance outside China very well. So that is the one big obstacles we have to overcome. There are efforts, but they are not enough. So that we are still seeing those damaging, harmful mining projects approved from China and expand to Africa.
Yeah. Okay, Jurian, third row back, third person in the black. And just quickly name, affiliation, and just a quick, succinct question if you could. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Will Moscow. I'm a former grad student from the University of Baltimore. I want to ask about empowering African actors. You mentioned before that it's kind of a win-loss right now with more of African actors suffering, communities suffering these things from mining. What are some ways that the international community can help empower African communities and African labor to kind of get on a more even playing field with negotiations on their communities and mining?
Okay, I want to collect one more question. Oh, and he snatched the mic from someone. Okay.
Yes, thank
Good,
you.
smart man.
My name is Bokar Cham. I work for Tetra Tech on land and resource governance issues, actually. I have two questions. One is for Mutoso. You mentioned that artisanal mining is banned in Zimbabwe, of lithium is banned in Zimbabwe.
Yes.
The question that I have is, how did the government of Zimbabwe came up in banning artisanal mining? Is it because just few people's livelihood rely on lithium, or is because environmental damages, or what? What happened to those people, actually? Were there any other option, actually, instead of banning artisanal mining? That's one question. The other question is to Jinglin. I'm from Guinea, actually. So the images that you show here are very, powerful, actually. Thank you for bringing those, because I work in that region, in Bokeh, from 2004 to 2008 for Alcoa, actually. On the joint venture with Rio Tinto Alcan, I was in charge of conducting environmental and social studies to identify a site where they wanted to build a refinery and a mining port. We did all of the studies, but they ended up not building the refinery because of environmental issues, actually. But then the government issued the land to some other companies, as you all mentioned, actually. So now this is what happened. So I went back this past year, actually, and I've seen a lot of junior companies, actually, in the region, and all of the environmental impacts that you can imagine. I would go from Bokeh to Sangaredi, all of the water streams, actually. From January to December, you can find water. But this time, no. It makes a lot of sense, actually. But it's not just the mining companies, actually.
Okay, can you ask your question?
Yes,
Sorry.
the question is, you guys have been, you said, in your introduction, you said you, Jinglin, and Emmanuel, you have been suing companies, actually. What are you thinking of about the Guinea case, for example, at this time? Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we got 3 questions. Where do you want to start? Who wants to leap in? We have the question about empowering civil society. And then Mutuso, you have the question directly from this gentleman here.
Sure, I can start.
And lean forward,
Oh,
sorry.
I can start by responding to the banning of artisanal mining, but it's within the lithium sector. So artisanal mining in gold is happening, but when it comes to lithium, that is where this ban is effective. So when the lithium rush started, it was free for all. Communities would also get some benefits, and even some of our studies show actually that there are even more benefits when there's free for all, because most of that money circulates within the communities, does not get repatriated and go to some other places. So when there's artisanal mining, we see an improvement in terms of livelihoods. But the government of Zimbabwe felt that this was one of the ways of promoting illicit financial flows. So that was the thinking that resulted in this ban. But again, as I say, that's contrary to studies, because when you look at the Mbeki high-level panel report on illicit financial flows, it's basically the big mining companies that are the biggest drivers of illicit financial flows, not necessarily these communities who are just mainly interested in livelihood. So that's the thinking. So, but I think also basically there's no really policy or strategy that is guiding lithium extraction in Zimbabwe. It's more ad hoc like. So the government of Zimbabwe banned, but then went on to make some exceptions to say these are entities that are exonerated that can actually continue to export even with that ban in place here. So as I said, there's no policy coherence in terms of how we should be able to exploit this critical mineral. It's ad hoc and mainly driven by politics of the day. Thank you.
Were the artisanal mines, how was the environmental impact of those? Was it better because it was their own community, or still challenging?
Not necessarily. It's always challenging, yeah, even with those artisanal miners. It is a very big problem because, well, the big mining companies, we can try to hold them accountable based on existing legislation, whether it is the Constitution, the Environmental Management Act. These ones have no responsibility to anyone. So they see the resource, they mine, and very mobile. Then tomorrow they move to where the resource has been discovered again. Yeah, so there are also a huge problem in terms of the environmental challenges and the pollution and the degradation. And that's why we advocate for sort of formalization where they could also be held responsible for some of their activities. Thank you.
Jingjing, briefly on the Guinea part.
Okay, the Guinea case, I would say what we are working is we look at those Chinese mining projects, the environment and social impact assessment, and we identify all sorts of problems, and we are helping our partner organization to prepare to challenge the government decision giving the Chinese project license and the environment certificate and mining license. We have found there are some big issue in their environment impact assessment, like the tanning, the mining tannings, the impact is missing. There's in the EIA, there's only 2 pages on the tannings, and say it would lead to future assessment. And the government still gave those mining project license without thorough assessment of the environment and the climate impact. And talking about those refinery you mentioned, Guinea government does require all the international mining companies to build refineries to add value to the local communities. But where the electricity is from, in this resource-rich but energy poor country, and refinery require power, electricity, and where those electricity come from, and Chinese companies are building coal burning plant, captive coal burning plant to provide electricity to refineries. And now we successfully stopped one of the Chinese company from building coal burning plant, but it's changed to heavy called oil fuel burning plant, another highly polluted energy source. It's not we want to have. So the issue is not the mining. In the future, Africa will face this issue when you want to manufacture in your continent. Are you ready for it? And do you have sufficient energy and regulation to deal with manufacture in Africa? So that I think the question we all have to prepare for African continent and other global South country.
So good. So with that first question, and then we'll come to you guys. We'll be quick. But one of you about the empowering of the communities. Is there some example either from the bottom up or from Western companies? Who wants to take that? Cloud? Okay.
Yeah,
Or you can arm wrestle over the answer.
Look, I think one of the biggest disempowering exercise is not to give information to communities and to suggest that communities don't know what they want. Normally, when you talk to communities, they do articulate very correctly what they want, what they need. That's why we promote the free, prior, and informed consent. That communities need to be empowered to be able to say yes or no, either to mining or the way mining is done or to the expansion of mining. But communities need to be consulted, needs to be participate in major decisions. That's why the grievance mechanism becomes important. How do we create space for dialogue between communities, with companies, but just also with local government, with the state? We should not spare the African state because it's a responsibility to protect communities. It's the African state responsibility to support this community and to build the capacity of this community to hold companies to account. Because of the state is weak, because the state is in collusion with mining companies. In fact, African state, instead of protecting communities, they protect companies. And that is a bigger problem. But more importantly, my sense is that then civil society then plays a very key role in organizing, supporting these communities for self-determination. And that way we want to go, is to provide this capacity for this community to protect themselves.
Okay, let's take these two. Oh, we got three guys.
Hear their questions and answer together.
I want to gather two, and then and we'll make sure you restate the question. Just real quick, short questions.
Franklin Moore, this is very quick because you just answered most of it. Your discussion was primarily about the communities and the company. Little discussion about the role of the central government or provincial government, who need to provide many of the things that are part of the standard. And I'd ask if you could speak about that just a little bit more.
Like how to help them. Okay, next question, short.
Hi, Bob Secuta, American University, retired U.S. Ambassador and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Sanctions and Commodities. Can I ask, you've talked a lot about China. The U.S. is playing a bigger role. Secretary Yellen's been out in the region, Undersecretary Fernandez. Can this interest by the United States now in mining, in processing, improving things be a help? Like an African perspective on that. Thanks.
Okay, let's just do the two, and we'll come. But we got to go. If we're snappy, we get to them all. So who wants to take the first question? Franklin's.
Let me just finish it, because look, I think the state.
Just short. Be short.
Very short.
Okay.
The responsibility, the state. There are two things. The regime of responsibility. That's the state's responsibility to hold companies to account. And the regime of responsibility should be above norms and standards, international and so on. But what we've seen is the reverse. The state is unable to implement its own regulation, its own policies and so on. And we need to resolve that. Then the responsibility of restraint, these global norms have come in to start and help this weak state. But the challenge also, if you cannot implement your own laws, how would you then effectively implement norms and standards that are not your own? That's why some of the certification mechanisms have failed simply because the state is weak.
But that actually leads into the second question. That, I mean, we had someone here from USAID a couple months or so ago saying that USAID is trying to work around the world in Africa to build the capacity. I don't know, is that something?
Sure, but even with that, yes, I agree with Dr. Kabemba that in terms of international law, the state duty to protect human rights is the primary responsibility of the state itself. But there's also now that realization that even with that, some governments are failing not because they don't want, but the capacity is not there. So in those instances, that's why there's now this corporate responsibility to respect human rights. So that's why we now have the UN guiding principles on business human rights, and that's why we are working towards a binding treaty on business human rights, because of that understanding that in as much as the responsibility is the state, but there are instances where there's failure, not because it does not even want to, but because of lack of capacity. So that's also no longer a justification to simply say because the state is weak and it's failing to provide this responsibility, so as companies we can do as we want. There's also now that responsibility on companies, because in some instances, these companies are more powerful than the state itself. Look at the Anglo-Americans in terms of their budget. Zimbabwe's budget is maybe 20 billion or something along those lines. But here's a multinational corporation with trillions of dollars. So even its ability to influence policy making is much greater. So that's why there's now this move to say that should not be regarded as a justification for corporations to play their part simply because the state is weak or is unable, it's unwilling. There's now the move towards corporate responsibility to respect human rights as well. I thought I should just add that. Thank you.
But
I'll answer the question.
I know, I was just about to say that. But what about, can the U.S., can the U.S. government, can we help? I mean, it was already mentioned that the U.S., the conflicts between China and the U.S. and other Western, that's opened up more opportunities. But what's your view on the U.S.? I mean, it's been said that the Biden administration wants to do more.
Yeah, maybe I would start with communities and then come to this
Yeah,
question.
just brief. Yeah, good.
I think I agree that when you are in the situation where the state is not able to protect, then you should work with communities to create a movement so they can defend themselves. I think for me, that's the idea. Of course, we need standards. We need even international treaty. But if the state himself is not able to implement its own laws, I don't see how this will help. So what we are doing as AfriWatch now, we are trying to create a movement of communities. That's why we created what we call Congo River School. It's a school where we need to train each year communities with the idea of building a movement, so people can ask the state to protect them. And if we need the state, because as NGOs we are doing something, but we are not a lot. We can't protect all communities. So we need to push community to be in the front of the line. So that's what we are doing. To the question of the US is coming back, I think it's a good idea. But they were there.
They were there.
They were there. So I don't know what will be. I think if you read the bill US is trying to put in place, which is they consider the fact that China is dominating these critical minerals. It's a threat, not for communities, not a threat for African global South countries, but for the US. So you can see the view, how they are looking. So I think we should be careful. I'm not sure that if we are not strong enough, if we are not asking more, that will help us or will make any change. But it's an opportunity for us to have two partners and try to see how we can work with them together, not for just for them to get this mineral, but to help us in terms of improving.
I mean, I think the long story short, there are groups where the USG and others can come and talk to about the needs and the capacity building. The gentleman there, I guess, and the woman over there. We got gender balance, guys.
So what's your perspective on Chinese workers? Because I'm looking at this way.
Can you say your name and affiliation real quick? Sorry.
My name is Prav from Quran Equities. So what's your perspective about Chinese workers coming to countries with the 9th being on global slavery index, 178th on HDI, Zimbabwe being 21st, and also 140th on HDI, high foreign kidnappings, high crime. I mean, aren't those human rights? And also, where's Chinese tax dollars are going? Property tax, all those tax dollars, where are they going? I mean, I want to hear a perspective about the other side as well. I mean, they're hardworking people coming from lands where there's no language, they know nothing about there. Come on, give them a break, man.
I think there was a question that came in from Deborah Rogers, from the president of Initiative for Equality, did notice that she follows the news in the DRC and said that there have been instances of Chinese workers in these mines being killed as well. I guess, is anything to say on that front? I mean, in some ways, the fact that, if some of these countries aren't enforcing their own standards, that means that it's not just unsafe for the citizens, but unsafe for the Chinese workers. Anything you'd like to add to that about Chinese workers also coming under threat and working in bad conditions?
Oh yes, there are a lot of cases of Chinese workers, Chinese managers being violently attacked by workers or by communities. And that starts to speak to how do you protect your investment. And the argument that we've put forward is that communities are not simply a passive actors. Now they want to be part, they want to control, they want to be part of the benefits. And that's why we are seeing that. In fact, the question that we are asking is how Chinese then are responding to those type of protests. Are we seeing Chinese behavior changing because of those type of protests, of that type of violence? That's a big question. I think we need to invest more to understand if Chinese companies are changing their behavior in terms of governance, transparency, in community.
Or building higher walls and more security.
But Jennifer, just one on the US question. I think it's an important one because we like it or not. the US wants to break the monopoly of China on these resources. The bill, in fact, says Chinese control of these resources in the Democratic Republic of Congo is a threat to US security. Not a threat to Congolese,
Yeah.
but a threat to US security. So now to answer your question, I think there must be a mind shift. Getting involved in the African continent needs to be on the basis of Africa's interest. Not just African interest, but on what Africa needs and demands. A lot of times, when Africa put forward its interest, they brandish either threat for any instability or war or disinvestment. That's why Chinese has taken advantage. But one most important thing is that when you read that bill, the Americans are saying, we will keep our eyes on democracy, on transparency, on accountability to ensure that, including electoral processes that are fair, inclusive, so that that guarantees a society that is stable and that protects and the way we can do business. So my sense about that is that we need what the African needs and want is that this time around, these minerals value are added on the continent so that it becomes an opportunity for industrialization. I understand Jingjing's concern about energy and so on. Why would America not invest in the Inga Dam? It's one of the biggest dams to produce energy that Africa can also export outside the continent so that this continent can manufacture its own and industrialize. But the problem we don't see is that as long as we keep Africa where it is, it's a threat to the security of China, of the US, of Europe. And you've seen it, and you are seeing it. Those boats will not stop coming as long as we don't change the economic model that we have. The economic model of pillage, domination, and extractivism will keep us in a very contested terrain. And I think the US needs to change that. And when they come in, they need to demonstrate to China that we've got a totally different model, where we respect human rights, where we help Africans to implement the African mining vision, where we help Africa to implement its green strategy. We don't have finances to move toward green energy. Since the promise of 100 billion to support Africa to transit, to shift, that money has never come. That's why Africans, they're saying, we are going to continue with extraction of fossil fuels because we can't live in poverty when we are resource rich. So that's why I see the mind shift. I know very soon there will be a pronouncement by the Americans, I think on the 1st, on how they are going to deal with critical minerals. My hope is that that more elevated strategic mind will prevail than fighting China. That will be a lost struggle.
Okay, we're going to do quick step. Woman in red and the woman in the middle. No, we've got a lot of guys. You can chat real quick your question, ma'am.
Yes, Kalalelo.
Yeah, can you stand up so we can hear you better?
Okay. Kalalelo. My name is Kalalelo. I'm a Southern Voices Network for Peace Building scholar with the Africa program here at the Wilson Center. And my question is to the gentleman from the DRC. Mineral resources are a main source of conflict in the eastern part of the DRC. And with China investing in the mineral resource sector, recently President Tshisekedi spoke about how he would want MONUSCO, the UN peacekeeping mission in the DRC, to leave the DRC in December. So I'm just wondering, what role do you see China playing in the peace and security in the Democratic Republic of the Congo? Thank you.
Okay, so just brief. You touched on a lot of it.
Yeah.
What's a point you didn't make before?
I think, I don't know. I think it, if you see when you go to the UN, how they vote at the UN, you will see that China was supporting Congolese decision to, because we were under sanction, we couldn't buy guns. And that's play also, because when we think about minerals, we think also about security. Because Congo was sanctioned, that was giving Rwanda advantage to buy guns and everything. And so when you see at this point that China was supporting DRC for the UN to lift sanctions, so there's some interest. And they are playing, there is a lot of Chinese companies which are doing artisanal mining in eastern of Congo.
Okay, I hate to say it, we've hit 11 and we have to stop.
Oh,
I'm
this
so
is such
sorry.
an
But hey, but you know it's good. Shall we invite them back sometime? Yes. Applause for these wonderful speakers. and Jing Jing being the queen matchmaker here. Well, thank you, people on the webinar, and I believe that's going to be turned off. So you guys can come up and chat. You in the audience, you have the advantage. You're 3D and in person. So you can